but we have Mary Robinson, who has served in that capacity, who's joining us here. This being International Women's Day, to you, Mary, and to indeed other female leaders in the agriculture community, thank you so much for all your work on behalf of Canadians. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. So with us today in the room from Empire Company Limited, Michael Medline, who serves as the President and Chief Executive Officer. From Loblaw Companies Limited, we have Galen Weston, the Chairman and President. And joining us online via virtual conference, we have Eric La Fleche, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer. So the way that today's proceedings will take place, we are going to allow up to 5 minutes for opening remarks from each of the witnesses, and then we are going to turn it over to questions. Colleagues, for your benefit, I intend to go about an hour and 20 minutes, 3 rounds of questions, and then we have some other additional committee work that we need to carry on with. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our first witness, Mr. Medline. You have up to 5 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the leader of a proudly Nova Scotia-born business that employs 130,000 people across Canada, I want to start by acknowledging the challenges that families in Canada are facing every day to make ends meet. Canadians are facing the highest cost of living increase in 4 decades. Interest rates have been rising steeply and prices on all goods and services have been rapidly increasing. It is no solace to struggling Canadians buying groceries to know that food inflation is a global phenomenon driven by higher commodity and input costs, or to know that food inflation in Canada is actually lower than many other G20 countries, including the US, the UK, and Mexico. Several factors have contributed to the high food inflation Canadians are experiencing, including geopolitical events, product input costs, extreme weather, soaring energy costs, and labor shortages. At Empire, I can assure you that we are doing everything we can to contain price increases and provide value to our customers during these trying times. And we're doing it on paper-thin profit margins of 2.5%. We believe we are seeing indications of inflation peaking and then abating this spring. But this is not an immediate salve, I know, for the many Canadians struggling financially. I'd like to make 3 main points today. First, I stand by everything shared with you in December by our Chief Operating Officer, Pierre Saint-Laurent. Most notably, we at Empire are not profiting from inflation. It doesn't matter how many times you say it, write it, or tweet it. It is simply not true. The truth is we are at the end of a very long food supply chain that has economic inputs at every step and stage. We detest the decisions inflation is forcing Canadian families to make and that we see in our stores each and every day. We see customers buying fewer items and trading down. Second, as a grocery retailer, we have been playing a major role in trying to minimize food price inflation, and we will continue fighting for our customers. Since inflation took off, we've been battling inflationary pressures in our business, including rising costs in products, fuel, labor, energy, and construction. So far, in 2023 alone, we are seeing the same volume of cost increase requests from the supplier community, with a slight indication that the requests are slowing this April. I am not going to throw our supplier partners under the bus. They are also doing their best in extraordinary times. They are greatly impacted by rising costs, which unfortunately they are forced to pass on to retailers. Many of our supplier partners are also dealing with the downstream cost impacts resulting from cost increases on supply chain control commodities like milk. We know groups like the Dairy Commission are facing the same realities that we are with their input costs. We're also heavily investing in our promotional offerings and flyer deals, expanding our private label value options and making shifts in pack sizes to provide Canadian consumers with more value during these difficult times. The third point I'd like to make is that there are ways government and business can work together to ultimately reduce prices. Empire is happy to partner with government on solutions to fight inflation. Government and business have a collective role to play to contain inflation, but I will list 5 specific examples here, as I know the intention of this committee is to gather research and ideas to alleviate the pressure of food prices on Canadians. First, implement a strong grocery supply code of practice. We were the first major grocer to support this initiative, and we continue to be an ardent advocate of a code of conduct to ensure fair practices for all participants in our food supply chain. Second, reduce congestion at Canadian ports and simplify the flow of goods across borders. Third, create better economic conditions for food manufacturers and growers to stay in Canada, as so many are fleeing to the U.S. 4, invest in greenhouse farming. We must find a way to reduce our reliance on American fresh foods to shorten the supply chain and lower costs to Canadians. 5th, do everything possible to strengthen the Canadian dollar. Of course, you will have to ensure this doesn't injure other parts of the economy, but it's critical in terms of food pricing. We would also ask that you look at the entire industry to consider solutions. There are giant American grocery retailers doing business in Canada who were not called to the floor here today. Are they exempt from playing a role in these issues? We are a proud Canadian company with 115 years of experience serving the needs of Canadian families. We have transformed to become a much healthier business than we were just 6 years ago, something that all Canadians benefit from. It is folly to suggest that an unprofitable grocery business is somehow better for customers and better for shelf prices. Canada needs and relies on a healthy grocery industry. Like all Canadians, we look forward to seeing the end of this tough inflationary period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Medline. We'll now turn to Mr. Weston for up to 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, and thank you, Chair and Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to sit before you today. The world is in the midst of a cost of living crisis. For 18 months, this has affected just about everything. Global food prices have risen quickly, putting significant strain on Canadian families, both in terms of their finances and overall health. It's a vitally important issue for Canadians and deserves the attention of this committee. For months, a great deal has been said about the role Canadian grocers play in food price inflation, many directly blaming us. This is understandable, but inaccurate. Here's why. First, food inflation is affecting every country, not just us here in Canada. And I know it doesn't feel like it, but Canada has one of the lowest food inflation rates in the world. Second, as unexpected as it may sound, grocery chains operate with extremely small profit margins, which means we have minimal influence on inflation. On a customer's $25 grocery basket, we earn just $1 in profit. That means even if the industry had zero profits, a $25 grocery bill would still cost $24. So the claim that Canadian grocers can correct food price inflation is simply wrong. Third, for those who say grocers are profiteering, the math just doesn't add up. Since inflation took off 18 months ago, the cost of that $25 grocery basket has increased just under $4. During that same period, the grocer's profit increased by 15 cents. In other words, food prices have increased 25 times faster than profits. And at Loblaw, none of those profits came from higher food margins. Our retail prices have not risen faster than our costs. So no matter how many times you read it on Twitter, the idea that grocers are causing food inflation is not only false, it's impossible. Fourth, and finally, we are actively working to keep inflation down. We stopped $500 million in unjustified cost increases last year. We welcomed 500,000 more customers to our discount, no frills and maxi stores where shoppers save about 10%, or $1 billion compared to traditional supermarkets. Our price freeze saved customers real money, and millions of Canadians continue to save 25% by switching to No Name. We are actively lowering prices on key essentials, losing money selling many of them. Last week, a customer stopped and challenged me in the grocery aisle. She said, if we were truly doing all these things, why is our profit increasing at all? It's a fair question. The biggest reason is that Loblaw is much more than a grocer. Non-grocery products like financial services, apparel, and importantly, Shoppers Drug Mart make up more than half our business. We've been clear. It's the efficiency of our business and the strength of categories like cosmetics, even cough and cold, that have been driving our growth. not food. These are facts. We've explained them in our public disclosures, and they are formally audited by an independent third party. That does not change the underlying challenge. And while I believe food inflation will normalize, there are still far too many Canadians facing food insecurity. We think about this a great deal, and I challenge our team on whether we're doing enough to change that. Last year, Loblaw dramatically expanded our relationship with the country's largest food banks. Through our work with Second Harvest, over 1,100 of our stores now have a direct link to a local food charity. Last year, we donated over 5 million kilograms of food. We've rapidly expanded our partnership with an amazing Canadian startup called Flash Foods that uses an app to make perishable food like meat and produce available at 50% off. It's now available at over 500 stores. And our President's Choice Children's Charity continues to lead the country in providing healthy snacks and meals to school children. At 123 million meals, we're well on our way to our target of reliably feeding 1 million children a year. Is that a lot of food? Yes. Is it meaningful? For many, it's transformational. But is it enough? No. The job won't be done until everyone has real food security. I'm proud to lead a company that partners with over 1,500 small business owners. Together, we employ over 200,000 people, united in the purpose of helping Canadians live life well. This is a responsibility we take deeply to heart. But solving food insecurity is not within the reach of one company or one industry alone. It requires all of us, retailers, manufacturers, growers, government, community leaders, and NGOs, all working together. Thank you. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Weston. Et maintenant, nous...
And now we will turn to Mr. La Fleche. You have 5 minutes, sir. The floor is yours. Your microphone is not turned on, sir. Hello. We know that Canadian families are in difficulty as they've been struggling with high inflation, including food price inflation, for almost a year. That's why, at Metro, our teams are working hard to provide the best possible value to the people and families that we serve every day under all our banners, thanks to our competitive prices, our private banner marks, and our weekly specials. As parliamentarians, you have a role to play in understanding the real causes of inflation and in working with our sector to find ways to alleviate supply challenges. More than ever, we do need to work together to find solutions to the cost of living crisis for Canadians. This period of high inflation is a global reality, yet Canada is faring better than most of the G7 countries. Despite this, there's no doubt that food prices here have risen due to rising supplier and producer costs. As confirmed in a recent Statistics Canada report, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, adverse weather conditions, and transportation and labour issues are among many factors that have contributed to higher food prices. These factors have led to an unprecedented number of price increases from our suppliers. In 2022, Metro received more than 27,000 price increase requests, averaging more than 10% from grocery suppliers alone. That's nearly 3 times our annual average. This year, we continue to receive a large number of price increase requests from our suppliers. Our teams handle these requests responsibly, negotiating firmly, fairly, and transparently to minimize impacts on our customers. However, it's important to keep in mind that our retail prices do not reflect the full effect of inflation because we, too, have absorbed some of the cost increases. Metro is a business, a private company. In an open, highly competitive market, we compete for customers, talent, and capital with both Canadian companies and U.S. giants, such as Costco, Walmart, and Amazon, that represent a significant portion of the market. I note that these U.S. companies were not invited to participate in the committee's work. Suggestions that we're somehow causing food inflation, using food inflation to inflate our profit margins, are not paying our fair share of taxes are simply untrue. As we report publicly every quarter, our profit margins have remained stable for years. Since the beginning of our 2022 fiscal year, our food profit margin has actually decreased, though it's been offset by a higher pharmacy products profit margin. Let me stress that no one at Metro wants to continue operating in a high inflation environment. We would like to see inflation return to normal levels, as that's best for our customers and for our business as well. In the meantime, we'll continue to provide the best value to our customers that we can at all of our banners through our competitive pricing, full range of private products, and effective weekly promotions. Trust in our company is driven by our loyal and growing customer base who demonstrate this trust every day through their hundreds of thousands of transactions with us. In closing, I hope all members of the committee recognize that the entire supply chain is under an unprecedented period of prolonged stress. Focusing on grocers will not solve the problem of food inflation because we're not causing it and we're not benefiting from it. As I said at the outset, we must work together to find solutions to the cost of living crisis faced by Canadians. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. La Fleche. And now we will have a chance to speak further through questions and answers.
Us as parliamentarians, I'm glad we are studying this issue. It is a top-of-mind issue for all Canadians. It's an emotional one. And one thing I think this committee does very well is we are principled in our ask of trying to get to the bottom of the facts. I would ask that you're principled and tough with your questions today, but it is my job to make sure that we maintain integrity. So please be mindful of that in your interventions with our witnesses here today. And with that, I will start with Ms. Rood for up to 6 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. You, as the CEOs of major grocery chains, have an oligopoly with only 5 companies controlling 80% of grocery stores in Canada. And you use this power to nickel and dime farmers and wholesalers to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars for many, with fines, chargebacks, and exorbitant fees for the privilege of selling their food to your stores, forcing them to accept contracts where, according to the Fruit and Vegetable Growers of Canada, 44% of producers are selling at a loss. And the world is worried about food security right now, and Canada has an abundance of land to grow fresh food to feed the world. But your company's practices of arbitrary fees, fines, and chargebacks are keeping your profits and grocery prices high while single-handedly helping to destroy Canadian family produce farms and businesses. And nowhere else in the world do grocers do this to farmers and producers. A farmer should not have to be an accountant to read their statements after selling to you. Prices are quickly becoming unreachable for roughly 12.5 million Canadians who are earning less than $40,000 a year, forcing them to switch from fresh, healthy food to heavily processed, cheaper, and less nutritious products. And that's not real food, and it's going to lead to an increase in the burden on our healthcare system. Canadians deserve to eat fresh, Canadian-grown fruits and vegetables, and we cannot rely on foreign countries to feed us. Foreign growers don't operate under the same high standards as our farmers here in Canada. And as someone who's been in the produce business, it's concerning knowing that the prices in store are inflated far beyond the costs of what a farmer is being paid to grow and then deliver to your distribution centers. And after 8 years under a government that's purposefully implementing taxes and policies that are harmful to Canada's agriculture industry, what your businesses are doing to farmers doesn't give a lot of hope to the average person who's simply looking to eat. And farmers' selling prices are going down while grocers are piling on fees and penalties, and consumer prices are going up in stores. So, gentlemen, I'd like to ask you, can you look farm families in the eyes right now? Because I know a lot of them are watching right now, and tell them that you're not pushing family produce farms out of business in this country? And are you even aware that 44% of farmers are selling at a loss in this country to you? Knowing this, my question is simple. Will you, once and for all, abolish all fees, fines, and chargebacks and actually pay farmers the price that's on their invoice? It's a yes or no. I can start with you, Mr. Medline.
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm not good at yes and no, I'm going to warn you. I'm going to try to keep. I'm going to do so. But by the way, I really appreciate your passion, Ms. Rood. And this is not just for today. I've read transcripts and I've seen what you've had to say before on behalf of farmers, and I love it. If I may, I'm going to try to do it real quick, Mr. Chair. But there are a few things I wanted to say here. First, on the question of oligopoly. Okay, the top 3 grocers in Canada have about a 47% share of the food retail market, not the 67 that's reported in some other places where they mix some things up. So I just want to get that straight. And this is not out of line with countries around the world. And we compete against some of the toughest food retailers in the world, including Walmart, Amazon, and Costco, as well as a lot of other competition. That does not sound like an oligopoly to me. And how do you account for the fact that Canada's food inflation is below many other countries? This is not a problem of too little competition. The problem is that there is a global product cost inflation. Having said that, I think there's a lot we can do to protect our supplier partners who deal with the farmers. I've been an advocate, as you have, Ms. Rood. October 28th, 2020, I called for a code of conduct. On November 4th, you seconded that and said this would be a great thing. We're still waiting for a code of conduct, which will get rid of unfair fees, which will help the supplier partners. It'll create more efficiencies and should bring down over some time the cost of food a little bit.
Thank you.
That
so
would really
you committed
help.
to a grocery code of conduct. Sorry, I have to interject here. I'm sorry, Mr. Medline. I only have another minute and a half left here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Weston, will you commit to the grocery code of conduct like Mr. Medline has with Empire?
So we're active participants in the development of the code of conduct. And let me just add, a healthy supplier community, a healthy grower community is absolutely vital to our industry. We work hard every day to support local producers, and you do get, there are concerned producers, and there are also those who write to me and they say that our business has been transformational in terms of expanding their access to new markets and new products, that are being sold all across the country. We also have to strike the right balance between between what we pay our growers, what we pay our suppliers, and ultimately, the food prices that we charge our customers. Our job is to negotiate the best possible price, and then to pass that through to consumers. So we do our very, very best, to strike the right balance. We have a very sophisticated process that we use to assess whether cost of goods increases are justified or unjustified. We push back on those that we believe are opportunistic, and we fully accept and push through those that are credible and realistic. And so,
respectfully, sorry, sir, I only have 20 seconds left.
Okay.
I have one more quick question, but I would challenge you all to do better for farmers, because we don't want to see our family produce farms go out of business in this country. And because of the fees that they pay you, that is the #1 contributing factor to them going out of business. But my quick question is, will you support and participate following any adjudicated disputes under the code? Will you commit to a fully transparent and publicly available disclosure? It's a quick yes or no.
we're certainly committed to developing an effective code that's fair and balanced on all sides.
Mr. Medline?
Yeah, you know where I stand on this, Ms. Rood.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. La Fleche, I didn't get to you.
Okay, well, we'll certainly have more opportunity for questions where you get a number of rounds here. We're going to turn to Mr. Turnbull for up to 6 minutes. Over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Just before I get started, I just wanted to share a general sentiment and agreement that I think we should be inviting Walmart and Costco as part of this study as witnesses as well. I think that's only fair. So thanks for being here to the witnesses. Every day we are hearing from constituents who are struggling with the prices they're paying for essential food items at the stores of Canada's grocery giants. And Canadians understand very well that inflation is a complex global issue. However, in the wake of the bread price fixing scandal, a cloud of doubt lingers over food retailers and their claims to be good corporate citizens. And Canadians are rightly vocalizing their concerns. Here are some of the facts that I've gathered. Pre- and post-pandemic profit margin averages in the food and beverage retail industry have gone up significantly, on average from 1.62% to 2.85% respectively. A year-over-year comparison shows that consumer food prices have increased on average more, in fact 3.7% more than the average price increase of a basket of consumer goods. Also, net income has more than doubled across the food and beverage retail industry as a whole, and we can find evidence in the reported net earnings of each of your companies. Loblaw's net earnings went from just over $1 billion in 2019 to $2.2 billion in 2022, and Empire Co.'s net earnings went from $387 million in 2019 to $746 million in 2022. In terms of sales volumes, we've seen evidence that the sales volumes peaked or spiked at the beginning of the pandemic and then have been declining since. And lastly, you've increased your quarterly dividend payments to your shareholders. Jim Stanford has said, and I quote, "If in fact the problem was all driven by supply shocks that supermarkets have merely been forced to pass on to consumers, there should have been a reduction in profits. And, I quote, to claim that supermarkets and other firms are innocent conduits merely passing on higher costs is empirically false." So Canadians want to know how you expect them to believe what you've said, which is that your profit margins haven't increased. And I think it's fair to say Canadians feel like the doubling of your profits has been literally at their expense. Something just doesn't add up here in my view. Mr. Weston, to you, how do you explain the massive increase in net earnings of Loblaw, given the facts I've mentioned?
Thank you for your question. We're very cognizant of the cost of food prices and their impact on Canadians all across the country. I see it, I hear it regularly when I'm in stores talking to customers, and I would call into question, the analysis that you reference. We look at our numbers very, very closely all the time, and I would just reiterate that our profit is $1 on a $25 basket of groceries. And if we invested 100% of our profits into lower prices, the price of a grocery basket would still be $24.
Okay. So
as far as our profit...
Don't mean to cut you off, sure. But so we have a difference of opinion, and perhaps we're looking at different numbers. Given that, are you willing to voluntarily submit your financial statements to the Competition Bureau to clear this matter up?
We have already submitted our financial statements to the Competition Bureau, and these are competitively sensitive, pieces of data, and so it's important that the Competition Bureau can see it, they can understand it, they can ask us follow-up questions, but we would be resistant, to disclosing that type of sensitive information on a public basis. Having said that, in our financial disclosures, we are a public company and we are held to the highest standard of transparency in our disclosures, and so you can see very clearly that our $1 of every $25 of grocery sales is in fact an accurate representation of our results.
Great, thank you. So my next line of questioning is for you, Mr. Medline. For too long, large corporations have treated corporate social responsibility as merely a public relations exercise. And many of them have dedicated a portion of their profits to corporate philanthropy, which I think we all can admit does some good in the world. But we also know that those who take their corporate citizenship and social responsibilities seriously are going much further in integrating these commitments into the DNA of their companies and making them central to the core of their business strategy. So, Mr. Medline, given your stated commitment to corporate social responsibility and sustainability, are you willing to do more to help Canadians in terms of changing your core business practices? And specifically, moving forward, are you willing to voluntarily give up a portion of the ballooning profits to help the average Canadian family through deeper discounts at the till?
Thank you. And a lot to unpack there. And if I don't get through it all, Mr. Turnbull, you can call me and we can talk about it more because there's a lot to come through. We at Empire are unbelievably proud of where we've come on the ESG journey over the last number of years, especially on sustainability. We just put out a report on ESG, which is pretty well state-of-the-art and says how we're doing in great detail and the steps that we need to take to be able to be better at it. We are, I think, generous philanthropists. But you can read the report and you can see everything we're doing in terms of treating our teammates some people call them employees, we call them teammates, well, how we're doing in terms of governance, and how we're doing on sustainability. Sustainability is driven from the board level down. It's one of our most important objectives. What I can tell you is in the last year, we have made sustainability and DE&I objectives, which are bonusable for our management at our company.
But will you offer steeper discounts at the till?
Let me just talk about that for a second. It's a great question. We at Empire, as you remember, as you may recall, not everybody knows perhaps, in 2017 we were in dire straits at Empire. We were making almost no money. We couldn't support our people, our stores, our communities. And over the last 6 years through Project Sunrise and Project Horizon, we've started to turn around our company. We have one of the lowest earnings profit margin in the world, and certainly one of the lowest in this country. As somebody said here in their opening statements, I can't remember who, it would take almost nothing in terms of changing our sales or our margin to tip us into a position of no profitability or less than that. And we have done everything we can. We're doing everything we can promotionally. We're not passing on every price increase. We're fighting against price increases. Our flyers are stronger. Our pack sizes are bigger. We're growing our private label business. We're doing everything we can to help Canadians.
We're going to have to leave it at that, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Medline. Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent pour 6 minutes.
Now, Mr. Parent, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our 3 witnesses for being with us here today. We really appreciate your presence. I'll try to work quickly, and I'd like short answers just so we can make good use of my time. Mr. Weston, you have answered to Mr. Turnbull that you cannot publish your financial statements because, it's a matter of confidence, a confidence issue and competition and so on. We certainly understand that. I can see the pile of papers before Mr. Singh. And, we too have a lot of interactions with people and Canadians when they see the types of figures that are coming out that show only overall profits. The whole issue of pharmacy products, we were told about that in a prior meeting we've had with some of your colleagues. Don't you think it would be better to be more transparent so that Canadians would be in a position to understand what your profit margins truly are? What you're saying is true. Isn't there some way to render something public without compromising your competition situation? Could you provide these data to members of the committee, for example, so that we could have an overall view, even sending them to the legislative clerk of the House of Commons, who could compile this and give some information to the committee about, overall what's going on, give us some indicators that could allow us to make better recommendations to our government. Mr. Weston.
For that question. We do publish our financial statements, as I mentioned, on a quarterly basis. They are fully audited by by an external auditor, and that includes our statements publicly. When we release our results, where it's our responsibility to explain in our documentation and in our analyst calls exactly what has driven the financial performance of the business. And in those statements, we are very clear and explicit about what is driving the improved performance in the business, and those are real. You can take those to you can trust them, you can believe in them. They've been audited.
No, I don't want to interrupt because I'm being impolite. It's just that we have so little time. Okay, I understand. I understand that you have made comments on that, but when it comes to asking why your profits are up, well, we're always told by pretty much all grocers that it's the pharmaceutical products, but we don't have that data. I think we're reasonable. I think we could deal with the figures, taking good care of them and being prudent in whom we share them with. But now I'm sending this message out to all 3 of you witnesses. Isn't there some way that you could gather that data in a certain form or another, without necessarily under one banner, but let's say overall, then we, in our role of as parliamentarians who are here to protect the public and manage information, we'd be able to make good use of that information. Are you open to that?
The request, I don't know who requested it, but is studying this. And as I mentioned in my answer to the prior question, we have provided all of that appropriate information. So hopefully, the output of that study will satisfy the committee. But let me take it away. I'll look and see if there, if there are other, if it isn't, appropriately or sufficient for this committee, we'll try and find another way to provide the disclosure. I just would emphasize that, we're obligated, through the Securities Commission, to speak the truth about these things. And so you can take what we say as the truth.
Merci beaucoup.
And maybe
Thank you very much.
if we are asked, to disclose the origins of our financial results at that level of detail, then I would urge us to ask all others, to do the same thing, whether it's Walmart, Costco, or anybody else. Thank you.
Okay. You said all three. Do you want me to answer or no? Short? Okay, we're very different at Empire Company. We have a very small pharmacy business. When you look at our numbers, you're seeing 90% grocery, so you can take those figures and you can figure out what we're doing in terms of sales margin profits.
En tout cas, vous comprenez, je pense.
I think you have the idea. Okay, but if all three of you could provide a maximum of information to the committee, just find a way to do it, that would be helpful. Thank you. Mr. La Fleche, to you, the 2% profit margin. Ms. Rood went into detail about the fees and so on that are being imposed, and I won't get into the details to not waste time there, but the 2% profit margin, do you calculate into that the fines, fees, chargebacks, and so on that you are charging? Is that included?
Votre microphone, Monsieur Le.
Your microphone, please, Mr. La Fleche.
The sounds, I think it's the clerk. En réponse.
So, an answer to you, Mr. Perron? Yes, our profit margin, our revenues, income includes all our fees. There's nothing hidden. Everything is transparent and negotiated ahead of time with our suppliers. Nothing is hidden, and all our fees and costs are there in our income. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, the other two witnesses have undertaken to work toward a code of conduct. I imagine you do as well. Yes, we are working on a code which will be managed by the players, by the sector, by suppliers and wholesalers. I think that can certainly work well. There's a lot to be done, but we're actively involved in preparing that. Again, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. So little time. So that being the case, my concern is, and concern that other members of the committee have as well, given that we haven't any information about what's going on in that negotiation in your sector, we're worried that it might become a symbolic code that would allow the sector to say, okay, this is great, slap each other in the back, we've got this lovely code and so on. And I'm not trying to be critical here, but just trying to look reality in the eye. So do you undertake to ensure that in such a code there will be provisions about, these types of fees and chargebacks and things that have been mentioned? You've got a supplier working with you who has a perishable good of the sort that Ms. Rood brought up. They've got very little leeway then. They can't really negotiate much. They're going to lose this produce in any case. So this could look like a dominant position that you would have with them in such situations. And again, this is not an accusation or anything. I'm just trying to understand what goes on. Do you think that in such cases there should be some party designated to deal with fees and things like that and fines? Try to, put a bit of order in all of this. You're running out of time, Mr. Perron, but Mr. La Fleche, if you would like to answer, you've got about 30 seconds. I'll give you that. Here's my answer then. Well, the whole idea of the code would be to increase transparency in matters of negotiation between suppliers and retailers. So that's indeed what we'd be doing. Thank you very much.
Mr. Singh, subbing in on behalf of Mr. McGregor, and let me go on the record saying, Mr. Singh, you've got big shoes to fill. Mr. McGregor is one of our good parliamentarians, so over to you for up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to set the stage. My question goes directly to Mr. Weston. Right now, we're not just going through unprecedented period of cost of living crisis. We have families going into your stores, looking at the price of items, looking at them and putting them back because they can't afford them. We have families that are struggling to buy food for their kids in this country, in a G7 country. And they look at you and they see you making record profits. How can you justify that when families are struggling to put food on the table for their kids?
Thank you. We feel and understand that 95% of Canadians are concerned about food prices. But grocery chain profits are not the reason for food inflation. And as I mentioned...
Profit is too much profit.
Well, so a company needs some degree of profit.
Record profits more than you've ever
Mr.
made,
Singh,
ever?
Mr. Singh, I'm going to stop you there. Of course, your time is your time, and I can appreciate that. But we've invited, in fact, we summoned these witnesses to come here. You ask a question. Every member of this committee is expected to be able to hear the response.
Certainly.
And I need you to certainly be a little bit more mindful of making sure that is. I know it's your time, and I'll give you that discretion, but please don't cross lines here. So back to you.
How much profit is too much profit? You're making more money than you've ever made. How much profit is too much profit?
We're a big company and the numbers are very large, but it still translates right down to the bottom line at $1 per $25 of groceries. And if you consider our growth in profit in 2022 is 25 times lower than the unprecedented increases in costs that are being faced by the industry and by the world. And the fact that we have lower food price inflation in Canada than in so many other parts of the world is in part due to the high functioning of our food system here and in part to the meaningful effort that is being made by the grocery store industry to keep prices as low as possible.
With respect, Mr. Weston, you've mentioned this $1 per grocery bit. We can put a fact in front of you. Your company is making $1 million a day in excess profits. No one feels sorry for your profit margin when you're making $1 million, not just in profit, in excess profit a day at the same time that Canadians are experiencing the most unprecedented inflation in their lives. How can you look a family in the eyes and tell them that that's okay, what you're doing is okay?
I had a conversation with a customer in a store just the other day. She came to me and she said something similar. She said, how can you have such exorbitant profits? And I sat down, I didn't sit down with her, but we chatted for about 15 minutes and I explained, what I'm explaining here to the committee. And she understood. And she said, okay, I didn't realize that. That's not the way it's being characterized, when I read the Globe and Mail or when I read the Toronto Star. And I said, yeah. I said, look, all I can tell you is that this is the truth. This is what's going on. And if we invested, if we didn't raise retail prices as costs went up, the companies that we operate would disappear almost instantly. And that's why this point about low profit margins is so important. 100% of the total profit of the industry could go into lower food prices, and the price of a grocery basket for that customer who I spoke to would still be $24. And that's not to say it's not important, but but our ability to affect this change is limited. That's why we need all to work together.
How do you square that? How do you square what you're saying with the fact that you're experiencing unprecedented profits while people are struggling? How do you square that with the record bonuses that you and your colleagues are receiving? How do you square that with the excess profits that you're making per day? How do you square that with the record profits you're making year over year? How do you square that? It doesn't add up. Mr. Weston, I've got more than 2,000 people who submitted questions saying we are struggling while you're making these record profits. That explanation does not give any solace to the people that I've heard from at all.
Well, I understand how difficult it is for so many Canadians, and that's why we're taking decisive action within the constraints of what we're actually able to influence. We stopped $500 million of unjustified cost increases, in our organization. We offer the lowest prices in the market in our discount stores like No Frills and Maxi. No Frills is recognized as having the most trusted prices in the country. We ad match in our large store formats on every single ad that is available in the market so that customers don't have to shop around from one store to another to make sure they get the best value.
That doesn't
We are
fix the
actively
problem.
losing money on core commodities, milk, vegetable oil, butter, certain cheeses, and all kinds of items in every day of the week. So we are working hard on behalf of Canadians.
You've still not been able to answer this basic question. Then when a family that's struggling right now looks at your profit, how much profit is too much profit? How much is enough? Like, you're making more than you've ever made ever. And you've not contradicted that point because we know it's true. How much profit is too much profit? At a time like this, when Canadians literally are saying that they are struggling, how much is too much then? Like, for you, is there no limit to how much profit you can make? On the backs of Canadians that are struggling because they can't afford the groceries, there's no limit?
Reasonable profitability is an important part of operating a successful business. I think at $1 out of $25 of sales, that's reasonable profitability, and it's worth mentioning. Big numbers. In large enterprises like ours. Let's say our profit, was in and around $1.9 billion last year. Very big number. Over $2 billion is going to be reinvested back in this country, back into supermarket, or back into new stores, new infrastructure, to creating jobs. It's not just about profit. It doesn't go to me. It goes back into this country. So if you have reasonable, profit levels,
actually, gentlemen, sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. I'll let you finish your thought, Mr. Weston. Unfortunately, we're at time. Mr. Singh, I even gave you a few extra seconds to try to make sure that was finished. Mr. Weston, if you'd like to finish out that thought. And then we're going to move on to the next round.
I would simply say that our profit levels are reasonable, and we are working hard to lower prices for Canadians in every way that we can. And the profit that we do generate, we reinvest back in this country to create more stores, more services, and more jobs. Thank you.
We're now going to turn to our second panel. Have Mr. Barlow for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, thanks to our witnesses for being here today. And thanks to the leader of the NDP for being present at the Agriculture Committee. But I do find it interesting. Many of the recommendations that we've had from previous witnesses as part of the study have said part of the reason for food inflation is inflationary spending, lack of fiscal discipline, and uncompetitive tax regime like the carbon tax. But unfortunately, the leader of the NDP is completely complicit in those policies, which are helping to drive up the costs of food. So I'm finding it interesting that he's here today to try and fight this thing, but he's part of the problem. But to the witnesses, you had mentioned about the grocery code of conduct, and I do find it interesting that we had Mr. McCain here yesterday, and his comments were that it's really not going to have a lot of teeth once this is in. And certainly maybe from your perspective, without having Costco and Walmart, I didn't even think of Amazon, as participants in that grocery code of conduct, do you believe that it will have some validity or some pressure for the grocery stores to start to be more transparent? And go ahead, Mr. Medline first.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Barlow, for your questions and your interest. I think unless we get everyone signed up, it'll be a farce. And I think we can get everyone signed up, and I think we need the help of the government to be able to do so.
Mr. Weston?
Yes. So the code of conduct can be a very positive, part of the industry, but it has to be developed in a fair and balanced way, and we're actively contributing to the conversations that are, hopefully going to get us there.
Sorry, and I don't want to forget Mr. La Fleche.
Sure. So the more participants, the better. We're confident that most industry players will participate in the code. So I can't speak for other companies, but we all agree that the code will benefit from broader participation.
And I guess, Mr. Medline, you're quite forceful on this, and I appreciate your passion on the grocery code of conduct. But you were mentioning about the transparency. This will allow more transparency on the fees and fines, for example. Why do you think a grocery code of conduct is needed to do that? Can't the grocery chains do that on their own and be transparent with the fines and fees that they charge the farmers, for example?
Doesn't appear so. I wasn't in the grocery industry until 6 years ago, just over 6 years ago. I was in the...
Good decision.
Yeah,
I didn't think you'd have to be here.
Yeah, it's a great business, but and I get to see Parliament for the first time since I was a little kid, so I'm happy about that. But it's a serious matter, and you know, I came over from hard goods and soft goods industry, and where people would work together. They'd work together to have more innovative products, to take costs of the system, to serve the customer. And I came over to grocery, and I was shocked at how the interactions were and how the friction between what I call them supplier partners, but people call them vendors, and between the retailers. And I think it's hurting the industry. It hurts the trust in the industry. I'm all for fair, tough bargaining and negotiations. I'm not for unfair negotiations. And so, yes, I was outspoken on this issue because, you know, it was bothering me.
Yeah.
And that was 2.5 years ago. I think we're headed in the right place. I think everyone's intentions are right. The supplier partners are behind it. We're getting more and more retailers behind it. And just ask the government, please help and keep boosting it. Thank you.
I guess I would ask all three of our witnesses here, and I think, as Mr. Turnbull said, we should try and compel Costco and Walmart to be here. I would ask all three of our witnesses here if you would table with the committee the list or the schedule of fines and chargebacks and fees that you charge the suppliers. I believe that would help us in the work that we are trying to do. So I would ask that you would do that. To Mr. Weston, you mentioned about the information that you provided to the Securities Commission. We do understand from the Competition Bureau yesterday or on Monday, they are beginning a study on this issue specifically. When you provide that your economics, your numbers to the Securities Commission, is it and to the Competition Bureau, is it broken down to, as you mentioned, you're seeing some growth in those areas that are outside of the food business, pharmaceuticals, clothing, what other products you'd be making? Are those numbers broken down when you provide that confidentially to the Securities Commission and the Competition Bureau?
No, our financial results and our financial disclosures are public, and you can see them. The Securities Exchange can see them as they are published. I think the point I was trying to make was simply that we are held to a standard of accuracy. They have to be accurate. They have to properly represent what's actually going on in the business, and the comments and the color that we provide also need to be accurate. And so when we provide the color and commentary that we do, both written and in verbal statements, they can be relied upon as accurate. And that's all I'm emphasizing for the committee.
Mr. Barlow, unfortunately, we're at time.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I'm trying to be generous because of the nature of this meeting and the fact that we're all trying to get the information, but we are at time. I will now go to Ms. Taylor-Roy for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. La Fleche, Mr. Medline, and Mr. Weston for being here today. I don't have all of the emails printed out from the constituents with the concerns I've received, as I'm a bit of an environmentalist. But I would say that my question will really be about the impact that this has had on consumers and on your employees or team members, as you like to call them, Mr. Medline. And I won't go through all of the facts and the data given on how your profits have risen, because I think you recognize that, and it's been pointed out many times. However, you talk about reinvesting those profits, and you talk about building more stores, and we've seen that there have been increases in dividends to shareholders. And while I don't fault corporations having a business background for maximizing shareholder value, I would think at these times that you could be reinvesting profits in different ways that might benefit Canadians who are struggling to make ends meet and to help those team members that work so hard on the front line. And one of the things that we noticed was how the hero pay was reduced by all grocery stores at the same time. And the freeze on no-name products was removed. And this was in the face of growing profits. So I'm wondering how these complaints or these concerns from our constituents, from Canadians, in the face of your growing profits, can be reconciled with those facts and what you can do to address those concerns. And perhaps, Mr. Medline, you can start.
Yeah, thanks, and thank you very much for the question, Ms. Taylor-Roy. Appreciate it. I'm going to try to unpack this. You talk about the team members, and it gets me a little bit because I think they're on the front lines, as they have been for now 3 years. They had to face the pandemic, then they face inflation. And, you know, a family is trying to feed themselves and the ends are tight because the mortgage payments are tighter because the interest rates going up. Groceries more expensive. They don't care about food supply chain and all the other niceties we talk about. It's tough. And our team members are on the front line and they're getting blamed. And I don't blame the people blaming, but it's tough on our team members. So thank you for saying that. You know, and I do think that business is balanced, and you have to. I always talk about, you know, Mr. Singh, you talked about how much profits or too much profits, but you have to make profits, but you have to make profits with values, and that might be different. We might have difference of opinion in that, okay, and what that means. But you know, I do think that most companies are a certain kinder capitalism than they used to be, and maybe capitalism for some people is a dirty word. I think it's good as long as it's kind in their values. Investing and balancing things, making sure people are treated fairly. But the CapEx we put in, we're putting over $800 million in this year, creates jobs, constructing stores. More people have jobs. More people have better paying jobs. And dividends are not a bad thing in my books, okay? Because a lot of people, when they retire, have pensions. A lot of people in this country. And we have to make some profits and pay some dividends so that they have something to retire on. So it's all balanced. I can see some companies that buy back shares. I think it's good. I think sometimes companies go too far and they don't balance it right. Our jobs as CEOs are balanced, really.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm sorry to interject, but time is short, so I do want to hear from the other witnesses. But I'm not sure that balance is being met right now. As I mentioned, the $2 decrease in the hero pay, the removal of the freeze on no-name products in all of the stores when consumers are still struggling with food prices. So,
sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're still talking. Sorry.
Yeah. So I've heard maybe now, because time is tight, Mr. Weston, you could comment on that and what more could be done to address these concerns.
Yeah, maybe I can comment on the no-name price freeze. It was specific to our enterprise. It was part of an ongoing effort, you know, something that we've been doing for months before and that we continue to do today to deliver value to customers, exactly, I think, in the spirit of what you're asking. That program was real. It saved customers close to $45 million over 3 months. And if you look inside in our public disclosures that you can see from our fourth quarter, you can actually see the impact of that investment and other investments on our overall gross margins as an enterprise.
Remove it then when inflation, profits are going up, inflation is still high. Why remove that?
So we didn't remove it. What we did was we announced that we were going to do it for 3 months over the holidays. It was our belief at that time that for consumers, having price certainty over the holidays would be the most important thing for them. As we come out of the holidays, you know, there are other things that are more important to customers. They want deals. They want to be able to go places and get the best possible prices. So we took that investment, part of that investment, and are reinvesting it in lower prices and new market lows. You know, so we're beginning to see key items actually going backwards. So there are all kinds of things that we do on a day in and day out basis. The price freeze was one of them, and we're not finished. We continue on.
No, I understand, but respectfully, profits have been going up significantly, however you look at it, whether you want to look at margin numbers and whether you want to look at what segment, but they have been going up. But it would seem to me that there was room to actually keep the price freeze in place, not increase those prices while having the promotions and the other things you're talking about. But I would also like to hear from Mr. La Fleche on this briefly as well.
So we're at time.
Okay.
But in trying to make sure that we hear from that witness, I have no problem giving some discretion. Mr. La Fleche, if you'd like to answer the question.
Our revenues have gone up, expenses have gone up, margins have not gone up. They've been stable for a long time, and food margins have actually declined. So those are facts. We work extremely hard, all our teams do, to provide value to our customers every day in all of our banners. We have very competitive prices, very compelling promotions, full range of private label products. So again, we work really hard to deliver value to our customers. And those are just the facts.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor-Roy. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent pour...
And now, Mr. Parent, you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds, more or less, sir. Thank you. Look, well, I'll go back over what was mentioned a little earlier, and I'm going to once again ask the CEOs with us here today to provide all the figures they're able to with precise breakdown, and we will treat them respectfully, perhaps based on some agreement we can come to with the House Clerk. We would certainly willing to take your word on profits, but we'd like to see some figures. And when the Canadians see figures that are higher than they were prior to the pandemic, and we've got an 11% food price inflation compared to a 6-point-something inflation overall, headline inflation, there's something going on in this sector. We'd like the information. Another matter now. You've all mentioned that you would like to see a grocer's code of conduct. I have said that I have some concern that it might be merely symbolic, good on paper, but not good in reality. Would you be willing to evaluate such a code a year after it would have been adopted to see how it's going? Quickly, Mr. Weston, to start, perhaps.
Happy to answer. So we are continuing to work on that code of conduct. As I mentioned before, the idea is to create the right form of transparency, fairness on all sides. And so would we be...
I don't want to be impolite, but I have so little time. So would you agree to reviewing the code 1 year after it would have been brought in?
And then we can decide how to evaluate it.
Yes, but would you be open to that? Would you be open to that idea? And perhaps Mr. Medline? Mr. La Fleche, how about you? Would you be open to reevaluating a code, reviewing it after it would have been brought in a year after? I think that it's a good idea once a code would have been applied to watch it change. It would take time to get it quite right in our sector. And as I say, such a code would be managed by industry players. So people in the sector would evaluate developments and the precision of the code and so on. Thank you for your answer, Mr. La Fleche. Mr. Weston, earlier you said that your market is not an oligopoly. However, 5 companies control 90% of the market. I think that sounds like an oligopoly. I'm just looking at it from the outside. I may be wrong, and you're welcome to correct me, of course. But how can we explain what Ms. Taylor-Roy has just underscored to the effect that salaries were dropped across the board by everyone at the same time? I'm happy to believe whatever you have to say, but looking at it from the outside, it looks like an oligopoly.
So if the question on pandemic pay, we introduced pandemic pay as during a period of extremely abnormal, conditions for frontline workers in grocery stores, and we believed it was at our encouragement, and it was our decision to bring that forward. No Parliament asked us to do it. No industry code of conduct asked us to do it. We made that decision because we felt it was the right.
Sure. I get that. I understand that. But here's the question: how do you explain that changed across the board all at once, at the same time, unless there had been some discussion among grocers? I mean, that's what Canadians are wondering. You look at it from the outside and we say, well, clearly they decided together.
But I certainly know that we made that decision independently, and that was the right decision at that time.
We're at time, Monsieur Parent, but I will allow Mr. Medline or Mr. La Fleche to respond to your question if you'd like, and then we will move on to the NDP.
J'entends pas bien la traduction est très faible.
I'm very sorry. The translation isn't very loud. It sounds as though the interpreter is far from me.
Those involved in the translation, can you hear me better now, Mr. Parent? And I speak.
C'est mieux.
Okay.
Yes, it is better. Thank you.
Line, if you'd like to just respond quickly, and to Mr. La Fleche.
I'm proud we paid hero pay. We weren't asked to. Some of the other retailers mentioned in this room that you want to hear from did not pay it. Maybe you should ask them. And we said we would keep it in as long as there were lockdowns, and that we would bring it back if regions locked down. After that, regions did lock down, and we kept paying hero pay. So I'm proud of that.
Mr. La Fleche, if you'd like.
Quand l'économie était réouverte,
when the economy opened up again, we removed the hero pay. We work in a very competitive market here in Canada, so we needed to work along with the other players and work basically keep in line with them.
To 2.5 minutes. Over to you.
Mr. Chair, before I go to my questions, I wanted to ask to propose a unanimous consent motion to extend the time to hear from the witnesses to the completion of our time in this committee, and perhaps the work of committee can go to another day. If I can put that motion forward for unanimous consent.
You can certainly bring it forward. I do know that this committee has other work that we were intending. I know you're not a permanent member, but I'll leave it to other committee members to decide.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, respectfully, we haven't heard from the others from Walmart and Costco, and until we do so, by respect to the witnesses, I mean, it's only fair that we've known this this meeting was going to happen. So it's not just about, we can call back the witnesses if we need to, but before I hear from Costco and Walmart, I think it's only fair to the witnesses that we agreed to 1:15, because we do have a draft report to finish. And with respect to Mr. Singh, I respect the proposition that is being made, but we also have a committee report that we need to submit to the House before we get going. So.
Okay. So unfortunately, that's not the case, but Mr. Singh, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Weston, you mentioned that you had a conversation with one person for 15 minutes. I have 2,000 plus people that have submitted questions. Will you undertake to respond to these questions?
I'd certainly be delighted to have a look at them. I get feedback, and I don't know if there are similar.
I don't want
volumes.
you to just have a look at them. I want you to respond.
I don't know
to
if there are similar volumes of email that I get, regularly inside Loblaw, and I respond to them on a case by case, on a person by person basis, and so it's more than just one individual.
So I'm asking if you would respond to these questions that I'm going to table to this committee. Will you respond to these questions?
I'd certainly be happy to take a look at them.
So you're not going to respond to the questions?
No, I said I'd be happy to take a look at them. And
I didn't ask you to take a look at them, though. I said, will you respond to these questions? That's an important question. If you're not going to, just say it. If you are, that's an important thing to hear.
I would like to take a look at them and determine what the most appropriate form of response is.
Okay, so you're not committing to responding to them. I would like to table these questions to the committee, Mr. Chair. So I have them here, and I want to table this to the committee.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned that a reasonable profit was something that a company should be able to make a reasonable profit. Do you think $1 million in excess profits a day is reasonable?
It's a big number, especially if you multiply it over the course of 356 days. But the math is still the same. The math is that on a very, very large sales base, that translates into I think it's 13 cents of that incremental profit represents about 13 cents on a $25 grocery basket. And I would just reiterate that the cost, we're in unprecedented times, global food price inflation grew 25 times faster than profits. That, to me, is a reasonable, fact-based proxy for an industry that is not taking advantage of inflation. So
just to understand, you think $1 million in excess profits, not normal profits, in excess profits a day that your corporation is making with you as CEO is reasonable profit?
I don't agree with your characterization of excess profits. I'm giving you the facts.
Well, it's not my character. This is a report from a professor.
I disagree with the characterization of the report from the professor.
We're going to leave it at that, gentlemen.
As I described.
We're at time, and indeed, Mr. Singh, I was generous in giving you a few extra minutes, a few extra seconds to finish that thought. Thank you, Mr. Weston. Thank you, Mr. Singh. We're going to turn to our final round of questioning. I'm coming back to the Conservatives. Mr. Steinley, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the things from a producer side. I grew up on a dairy and beef farm, and I look at what people are getting at the farm gate to what prices are in stores. And most of you commented that input costs have gone up. So I wanted to ask the question of, are you talking about input costs for producers have gone up and thus you've had to pay more for goods? Because Mr. Weston, you used that specifically, that comment, fuel costs have gone up, input costs have gone up, energy costs have gone up, and labor costs have gone up. So can you kind of break that down? And I'll get to my next question later, but just kind of break that down a little bit for your input costs.
I think that was Mr. Medline who said that.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Medline.
Well, I'm just looking at, pretty well every single input cost you could have in business has risen over the last, let's say, 17 or 18 months, everything. I couldn't find anything that's gone down. So I'm just looking at the less than the last 3 years. Butter up 59%, corn oil up 140%, wheat up 109%, flour up 63%, turkey frozen 78% up. Then you go to packaging, tin up 53%, pulp up 45%. I'm not going to keep going on. Freight, fuel, labor, every inputted cost has gone up.
The price of business is going up.
Yeah.
So from the Canada Food Price Report in 2023, I'm going to read this quote, and I'd like you all three of you to comment on this. By 2030, a typical 5,000-acre farm could see taxes of over $150,000, which would comprise the owner's ability to make a profit. The added cost of a carbon tax will increase production and transportation costs associated with food and may be passed on to the consumer as producers try to remain profitable. End quote. My question is, you've talked about the global phenomena of food price inflation, but how much have government policies led to the increase of food price, like the carbon tax and possibly like the fertilizer reduction, and that's going to make the price of food go up?
Okay, I'd be happy to start. It's a great question. I can't comment, with any real precision on what the government policies, have been and the impact that they've had on a manufacturer or growers, cost of doing business. I know in our case, for example, with milk, our most popular dairy SKU, we sell below cost every single day. And so wherever those costs are, they're coming up, they're being pushed up, and they are certainly not being captured inside our grocery margin. Thank you.
Other comments? Mr. La Fleche?
Well, there's no question that input costs for producers have gone up, way up over the last several months, and their costs to us have gone up, and that's this whole supply chain and why food inflation is up, like we've been saying since the beginning. I don't think it's for us to comment on which government policies have had an impact on those input costs.
So you're telling me
for those producers.
Yeah. So you're telling me a government policy that increases the cost of fuel, like a carbon tax, isn't adding to the cost of you doing business and adding to the increased price of food?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's not for us to comment on which government policies are having which impact on their producer costs. But clearly, their costs are up. What the exact root causes of those input costs are, I'll leave to others. I'll leave to other experts.
Mr. Medline, any comment?
Eric, I'm not a politician. There are so many actions that increase the cost of goods. So anything that happens that puts a cost on will increase the costs to consumers and will hurt farms. Obviously, it's up to the government to decide and balance, just like we have to do in our businesses. You have to balance which of those costs are worth it and which are not.
Thank you. I have one last question. I have a minute left, so I wonder if each of you could take a swipe at this one. If you guys are doing business fairly and openly and transparently, why would you guys need a grocery code of conduct?
So we do try our best, to do business in a fair and transparent way. We believe that we do business in a fair and transparent way 99% of the time. If you think about what we do, we buy products and we sell them, and we negotiate with the people who sell us the product for the lowest possible prices. That can lead to tension. Those tensions, despite the best sort of will in the world, can perhaps lead to bad judgment. Bad judgments on both sides. As an example, I think we've commented on this. We've seen a number of what we would consider to be unjustified cost increases that have been put through or requested by vendors over the last number of months. So it's really important that any code or any set of practices that we engage in are properly balanced. From our perspective, we are implementing changes today based on feedback that we get from vendors, to improve that transparency regardless of whether we have a code of conduct. If we have one and that one works effectively for all sides, that's terrific, but it won't stop us from changing our policies and programs to minimize those incidents where poor judgment is used.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Steinley. We're at time. I don't know if Mr. Medline or Mr. La Fleche wanted to weigh in at all, or if not, that we can leave it at that. Very quickly, if you could.
Yeah, I think that obviously transparency is really important. But what I did was when I came into the industry, I spent a lot of time talking to supplier partners, what some people, as I always say are vendors. And some of the stories I heard I didn't like, and I thought that the transparency wasn't working well enough, and I think that a code could help us all.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll now turn to Mr. Drouin for up to 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I will share my time this last minute with my colleague, Mr. Turnbull.
Women's Day, and I do want to thank all of the women who work for your businesses. I know they work hard. I get to meet them not every day, but almost every day in your stores. I think the issue we're talking about here is public trust, and how do we provide public trust to consumers overall. And when we're dealing with food, we deal with it on the agricultural level. And I want to start by saying that everybody deserves to make a reasonable profit from the farm level to the retailers. Everybody deserves to make a reasonable profit. Where we face some issues is, and it's been mentioned by some of my colleagues, is a few years back, and I know some of you were you worked with the Competition Bureau, but the whole issue about bread price fixing from 2001 to 2015, that caused a breach in public trust. And I think this is part of the reason why we're here today. And I don't want to point, my goal here is not to point the finger at anyone. I just want to find solutions. And I don't think our committee is equipped to determine whether or not you're making an okay profit on a certain product or not. I think the Competition Bureau is the right place for this to happen. That being said, some of you have stated that you have provided financial statements. It's been said publicly by all of you, I believe, and that most of the profit margins or most of the profit has been on non-food products. My question is, and some of you has testified today that financial statements were provided to the Competition Bureau on a voluntary basis, because I believe the Minister of Innovation and Science and Economic Development back in May 2022 wrote a letter to some of you to ask the Competition Bureau to look at this. Is the statements that you have provided, is the Competition Bureau going to be able to determine the difference between profits on food items versus non-food items? And I would start, and I'm just going to start with Mr. Weston, Mr. Medline, and Mr. La Fleche en ligne.
Yes, certainly based on the submissions that we provided. If I can just comment very briefly, though, we're focusing on, I know I keep saying it over and over again, it's probably frustrating you, but this $1 is what we're focused on of the $25. And all of this time, effort, and exposition is focused on that amount. No matter what is there, and there isn't anything of significance there, that isn't going to change the cost of food. It's not going to solve the challenge, for Canadians. So I would urge this committee, as long as it continues to operate, to expand, its inquiry into the full value chain, because it's just simply not mathematically possible for all this to sit in that $1, and that's, something that we should collectively try to address.
Fair enough.
First, I'm just going to set the record straight. The Competition Bureau investigation into bread price fixing has been going on about 8 years now. Empire Company did not fix bread pricing. I just want to be clear on that, okay? I think for us at Empire Company, the financial statement, red herrings, you get pretty well from our financial statements what they are. We provided all sorts of information to the Competition Bureau, I think, that is far more interesting, and would like to do that. I do worry that
I'm sorry, I'm going to run out of time. Will they be able to determine the profit margin? I don't need to know that, but will they be able to determine the profit margin from food products versus non-food products? And I think that's the main key.
I hope they can. I've read the submission.
Okay.
If they can't, they should contact me.
Thank you.
I do want to say, though, I do worry we lost trust.
I'm going to run out of time.
Yeah.
Monsieur La Fleche, vous avez 15...
Mr. La Fleche, 15 seconds to answer my question. My only question is, the financial statements that you provided to the Competition Bureau, will they be able to tell from that the difference between food products and non-food products? Thank you for your question. Just a quick comment on the bread scandal. Metro has never been found to have disrespected any competition legislation? Yes, with full respect, sir, I just need an answer to my question. I'm offended by the allegation that we were involved in that scandal. As for the Competition Bureau, yes, we're providing the documents to them, and I will fully comply with whatever they request.
I wanted to ask for a point of clarification. So Mr. Singh here asked to table a stack of questions to the committee. So one is I want to clarify whether MPs can table evidence in committee. I didn't think that they could. Another question for Mr. Singh would be if he's provided questions in both official languages. I'm also interested to know whether he's got the consent of the individuals that he's disclosing questions and whether there's personal information of Canadians being disclosed in those documents. And I think we have to be responsible when considering tabling evidence in committee.
No, those are important points, Mr. Turnbull. Obviously, it happened in the interaction. I know our clerk was looking into that. In the interest of this committee, I think I'm going to let our clerk to continue to look into it. It's ultimately, I'll turn to you if you have an answer right now, Madam Clerk. If you don't, she's going to continue to look. Go ahead, Mr. Turnbull.
Just while I have the floor, I also would like to move a motion that as part of the committee's study on food price inflation, the committee invite the following witnesses: Horatio Barbito, CEO, Walmart Canada, and Pierre Riel, Senior Vice President, Country Manager, Costco Wholesale Canada. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Colleagues, thoughts on that in terms of the idea of inviting some of the CEOs? I see Mr. Singh supporting, Mr. Parent. I presume, of course, you have the Liberal support, and Mr. Barlow as well. Okay, that'll be moved then. Madam Clerk, I don't think you require anything else. It's unanimous consent that we will move that. You've got that. Colleagues, that brings us to the end. I do want to recognize there's a couple members of Parliament who have taken their time to be here on the committee. Mr. Epp from Leamington, Mr. Fragiscatos from the London area. I don't know your exact name or your exact riding. And Mr. Morris. Mr. Morris sits with a party that is not recognized, so they don't have status here. But with your permission, and in the interest of allowing him just a brief moment, as your chair, I would like to give him 1 or 2 minutes to just ask a question. I do believe I need unanimous consent, but this committee has always worked pretty good on consensus. Do I have that? Okay. Mr. Morris, about 2 minutes, please.
Well, let me start by saying thank you to those who believe our Parliament can't function well. I think that was an example of functioning really well. So thank you to all committee members and to the chair. I'll stop using up time on thanks and turn to the executives who are with us. My question to you is trying to reconcile recent earnings results. Loblaw, for example, Q4 brags about earnings increase of almost 13% over the previous year. And time and again throughout the last hour and a half, hearing each executive say, but our earnings are reasonable. Can I have you each comment, yes or no, whether you would support an excess profit tax that has been called for by many, including Mr. Singh, here in the last hour, an excess profit tax above your regular profits, which you're now bragging about having increased from, specifically so that the Government of Canada could use that to reinvest in supporting the lowest income Canadians who are suffering from the cost of living crisis that we're in. Would you each comment on whether you support an excess profit tax, which would raise $4.3 billion over the next 5 years? Thank you.
Look, I certainly believe that Canadians expect us to pay our taxes, to pay our fair share of taxes, and we do. Last year, Loblaw paid $850 million in tax. I've said this before. I think you have to do the right definition of a windfall tax, and then determine exactly who should pay it. And when I go back to this point about looking at the entire value chain, if there is a windfall, then it needs to be assessed throughout the entire value chain, not just at the end of the value chain, where, as I said before, there's $1 of the total, impact. Having said that, I do not believe that there are windfall profits, in the grocery industry today. I believe that what is impacting high prices for Canadians is a global cost of living crisis that affects folks all over the world, and that Loblaw is doing a very significant amount to ease the burden on Canadian consumers every single day.
Mr. Morris, we're going to, I think, in the interest of time, we're going to let Mr. Medline answer your question, and Mr. La Fleche, and thank you for your intervention.
I'll keep it brief, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Morris, for your question. Appreciate it. Without the details, it's a broad question to be able to answer. I'd like a bit more detail. But when I think about a windfall tax, I do get concerned that it would penalize companies that are rightfully improving their businesses the right way. I worry about unintended consequences always. And I worry that ad hoc taxes discourages investment in this country. And I think we should be encouraging investment in our great country.
Mr. La Fleche.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I disagree that there's any excess profit here. We make a reasonable profit and we pay full taxes on it, all of them in Canada at very different levels of government. So I don't think a special tax on grocery would be constructive. It would probably reduce investment, reduce innovation, and not be fair.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Colleagues, as your chair, I rarely get the opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to indulge myself just very quickly on two ones as I listen to the testimony here today. Mr. Weston, you talked about how Loblaws has voluntarily provided information to the Competition Bureau. Mr. Medline, I think you've acknowledged that Empire has done the same in terms of providing information to the Competition Bureau. We haven't heard from Mr. La Fleche. I would be interested in hearing from Metro's perspective. The one challenge this committee has had, and Mr. Drouin really touched upon it, is trying to delineate the success and the profits of the various companies that are before us here today, and the delineation, as Mr. Weston, you recognize there's multiple lines of business. Mr. Medline, you've mentioned that perhaps Empire's additional businesses outside of food are not as significant perhaps as some of your competitors, but we as parliamentarians have difficult in trying to get that access to information. We had testimony from the Competition Bureau that suggested that changing their legislation to actually allow them to compel information from companies of interest in these market studies would be a very important regulatory change. So I guess my question to all three of you, Mr. West, I think you've addressed it, perhaps Mr. Medline as well, is have you submitted information to the Competition Bureau that delineates the two? I think the two in the room have answered that. And then I guess my secondary question would be, are you open and willing to that proposal from the Competition Bureau to give them perhaps a little bit more regulatory pull to compel information for market studies specifically? Mr. La Fleche, perhaps we can hear from from Metro about whether or not you voluntarily provided to the Competition Bureau, and then I'll allow all three to answer the broader question. Thank you.
So we are participating in the Competition Bureau study. They have made certain requests. We will take them all seriously and fully cooperate with them in a normal way, as long as it's market-wide, competitive, and confidential, and that there's no competitive disadvantage in doing so. So as it was said before, and it's the same for us, we publish our results according to international financial reporting standards. They're fully audited. We provide color on pharmacy and food to explain our numbers, and we provide extremely detailed information quarterly with a lot of information annually. So there's a lot there for the public to see and for all members of the committee to see. But we will participate in the study of the Competition Bureau.
Does your company have a perspective on the Competitions Bureau suggestion around giving them more regulatory powers to compel beyond your voluntary nature of how you're cooperating right now? Is that something that you would support, or do you need more time to reflect on that?
Well, we would need to see exactly what's asked or exactly what that entail and what that means. So I can't really comment. I'll take a note of it, and we could get back to you.
Mr. Medline?
Response is Eric.
Mr. Weston?
Yeah, I feel very much the same way. And if the Competition Bureau isn't getting the information that they need from us, all they need to do is call us and let us know, and we'll be happy to make it available.
Last quick point that I want to raise, given we have the member from Leamington here and the greenhouse sector being so important in his riding. Mr. Medline, you mentioned your company's deep roots in Nova Scotia as a member of Parliament from Nova Scotia. I appreciate that. Can I give you about 45 seconds to talk about your work in vertical farming? I know Empire has been involved, and whether or not we as parliamentarians, you really mentioned one of your strategies or one of your thoughts on addressing food price inflation is actually investing in the greenhouse sector, which I think is part of Canada's strategic interest, particularly in southwestern Ontario. I'm going to give you just a moment to elaborate on anything else you might want to leave for us as parliamentarians, and then we're going to wrap up.
Well, thank you for saying that. Whenever we can, we want to buy Canadian. We want to buy local. We've increased our local purchases, you don't even know how many times over the last number of years. It is a difficult business to greenhouse gas. I've got greenhouse gas on the mind here. To farm out of greenhouses, that we've got to make it easier to have shorter supply chain. We have to buy Canadian, support our farmers. We have to lower the price, not rely on others. But I think that the government should look at ways that we can help these companies. These are hard companies to start up. Unfortunately, we've seen some of them fail because they're very difficult, and we would love to support, by buying these products as we do today, more and more Canadian produce, which is obviously very difficult to get our hands on in months like this.